There are questions in your life that are not really questions at all. They are keys, turning in locks you never knew were there, opening doors into rooms you had meticulously bricked over in your own mind. They arrive disguised as casual conversation, wrapped in the comfortable fabric of a Tuesday night, smelling of takeout and the familiar scent of the person sitting next to you. But when the words leave their lips, the air in the room changes. It thins. It crystallizes. And you are left in the sudden, ringing silence, realizing that the architecture of your life is about to be permanently altered. For me, that moment came on a perfectly ordinary evening, sunk into the worn cushions of my sofa, with Liam's shoulder a warm, solid presence against mine. He had shifted, just slightly, turning his body towards me so that the faint light from the television cast his face in a landscape of soft shadows and gentle highlights. His gaze, which had been fixed on the mindless drone of the documentary we were pretending to watch, drifted and settled on me. It was a look I knew well, the one that meant his mind was churning, about to spit out some observation or half-formed thought. Usually, it was about a new coding problem he was wrestling with, or a complaint about his firm's latest project management software. But this time, the look was different. It was softer, more inquisitive, and it held a strange weight that made the breath catch in my throat. He was quiet for a long moment, the silence stretching until it became a tangible thing between us. Then, his voice, low and threaded with a genuine curiosity that felt both innocent and incredibly dangerous, broke the spell. "Leo," he began, his name a soft sound in the quiet room. "Why do you never date?" And there it was. The key. I could feel it sliding into the lock, the cold metal of it sending a tremor through my entire system. It was such a simple question, the kind of thing friends ask each other all the time. But from him, it was a wrecking ball. He had no idea, of course. For him, it was just a stray thought, a piece of conversational lint he was picking off the surface of our long friendship. For me, it was an excavation. It was a demand to explain a cavernous, carefully guarded part of myself that was shaped, almost entirely, by his existence. The answer was a single word, a single name. You. You are the reason. You are the reason I measure every potential touch against the memory of your hand accidentally brushing mine. You are the reason every voice sounds hollow compared to the timbre of yours. You are the reason I have built a fortress of solitude around myself, because the only person I want to let inside is the one who has no idea he is already the king of the castle. But I could not say that. To say that would be to detonate the foundations of the world we had built, a world I cherished more than any possibility of romance. Our friendship was a sanctuary, a quiet, sturdy structure that had weathered college exams, career anxieties, and the general chaos of navigating our 20s. I was its silent, watchful custodian, and I would not be the one to set it on fire. So I manufactured a shrug, a gesture I hoped looked casual and not like the seismic shifting of tectonic plates I felt within my chest. I tried to assemble a response from the scattered debris of my thoughts, something plausible, something that would gently redirect his curiosity and lead us back to the safe, shallow waters of our normal conversations. I focused on the way the lamplight caught the edge of his jaw, on the faint, clean scent of his laundry detergent, on anything other than the hurricane his question had unleashed inside me. The silence lingered, pregnant with all the things I could not say. He watched me, his expression patient, waiting for an answer I did not have. And in that moment, a reckless, desperate impulse took hold. I decided to turn the key back on him. "I don't know," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. I looked at him then, truly looked at him, and let a sliver of the truth color my tone. "Why don't you?" The effect was immediate and astonishing. A slow, undeniable blush crept up from the collar of his shirt, flooding his neck and spreading across his cheeks until it reached the tips of his ears. It was a deep, consuming crimson, a stark contrast to his usually pale skin. His eyes, which had been so direct and curious just a moment before, widened and then darted away, breaking contact as if my gaze had physically burned him. He cleared his throat, a small, rough sound, and shifted his weight on the sofa. The subtle architecture of his posture suddenly defensive, closed off. He had asked me a simple question, and I had returned it. But my question was not the same as his. His was an inquiry into a pattern of behavior. Mine, coming just months after the messy, protracted end of his 6-year relationship with Sarah, was an inquiry into the state of his heart. And for some reason I could not begin to fathom, that inquiry had touched a raw, exposed nerve. He had expected a simple answer, and I had handed him a mirror. And the man in the reflection had clearly startled him. Our friendship had begun, as so many do, in the crucible of forced proximity. We were assigned as roommates our freshman year of college, 2 names randomly paired by a housing algorithm that, in its cold, binary logic, managed to stumble upon a perfect, life-altering equation. I remember seeing him for the first time, standing in the doorway of our sterile, cinder-block room, all restless energy and easy confidence. He was a whirlwind of motion, dropping boxes, gesturing wildly as he talked on the phone, a broad, uncomplicated smile plastered on his face. He was a software engineering major, an athlete who played intramural soccer with a fierce, joyful competitiveness. He was everything I was not. I was a photography student, quiet and observant by nature, more comfortable behind a lens than in the center of a room. I moved through the world with a deliberate slowness, cataloging details, textures, and the subtle shifts of light. Liam did not move through the world. He crashed into it, joyfully, leaving a trail of laughter and amiable chaos in his wake. I was convinced we would last a semester before one of us requested a transfer. I had built my life around quiet spaces and predictable routines, and Liam seemed to be a human embodiment of a surprise party. Yet, from the very beginning, he carved out a space for me. He seemed to understand, instinctively, the boundaries of my introversion. He would burst into the room with a group of friends, the volume cranked to 11, and then, upon seeing me sketching at my desk, would immediately lower his voice, shushing his friends with a gesture and steering them back into the hallway. He never made me feel like an inconvenience or an oddity. He simply accepted my quiet as a fundamental part of me, just as I accepted his noise as a part of him. He was the tide, and I was the shore, and somehow, we found a rhythm that worked. He would pull me out into the world, gently insisting I come to a party or a game, and I would be the one to make sure he remembered to eat a real meal during finals week, leaving a plate of food on his desk while he was lost in a labyrinth of code. The transition from roommates to friends was seamless, an invisible, organic process. It was built in the late hours, after the parties and the study groups, when the campus fell quiet. We would talk for hours, sprawled on our respective beds in the dark. He would tell me about the intricate logic of his programming assignments, and I would try to explain the emotional logic of capturing a specific expression on film. He spoke of algorithms and data structures, and I spoke of composition and aperture. They were different languages, but we were both describing the same fundamental thing: the search for a pattern, for a way to make sense of the world and capture a piece of it. It was in those quiet, shadowed conversations that I began to see past the bright, sunny exterior to the thoughtful, sometimes anxious, man beneath. He was not just an extrovert. He was someone who drew energy from connection, who deeply valued his relationships and feared letting people down. And it was there, in the safety of the darkness, that I let myself become one of those people. My feelings for him were a slow development, like a photograph emerging in a darkroom. At first, there was just an indistinct sense of admiration, a fondness for his energy and his kindness. Then, details began to emerge. I started noticing the small things: the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he genuinely laughed, the focused intensity on his face when he was working, the surprisingly gentle way he would handle my camera if he ever picked it up. I began to catalog these moments, storing them away like precious negatives. The image of my affection for him slowly sharpened, gaining clarity and contrast until it was undeniable. It was not a sudden, dramatic lightning strike of love. It was a gradual dawning, a quiet sunrise I watched happen within myself, and by the time it was fully visible, it felt as if it had always been there, a permanent feature of my internal landscape. Of course, he had Sarah. He met her sophomore year, and for the next 6 years, she was a constant, pleasant presence in our lives. I liked her. Truly. She was smart, funny, and she clearly adored Liam. She understood the strange, quiet bond we shared and never seemed threatened by it. She accepted me as part of the package, the resident best friend, the quiet observer who was always there. And I played my part well. I became an expert in emotional camouflage, burying my feelings so deep that even I sometimes forgot they were there. I listened to him talk about their future, about the house they might buy, the life they would build. I smiled. I offered advice. I was the perfect, supportive friend. Each word was a small act of self-betrayal, a tiny stone I used to wall off that part of my heart. I convinced myself that my friendship with him was enough, that this quiet, adjacent role in his life was the most I could ever hope for, and that it was a gift I should be grateful for. And for a long time, it was enough. The ache was a dull, manageable thing, a background hum I learned to live with. Then, about a year after we had graduated and moved into a 2-bedroom apartment together, the foundation of Liam's world began to crack. His relationship with Sarah, which I had always viewed as a fixed, immutable thing, started to fray. It was not one big, dramatic event, but a slow unraveling. They wanted different things. She got a job offer in a different city. He was tied to his work here. Their conversations, which he would recount to me in hushed, frustrated tones late at night, became circular arguments, each one chipping away at their shared history. He grew distant, restless. He started working longer hours, spending more time at the gym, anything to avoid the inevitable conversations waiting for him. He was like a man standing on a shoreline, watching a storm gather on the horizon, pretending that if he just focused on the sand at his feet, the sky would not break. The breakup, when it finally came, was both a cataclysm and a relief. It was quiet, sad, and utterly devastating for him. There was no shouting, no dramatic exit. Just a long, tearful conversation that ended with the quiet closing of a door, leaving 6 years of shared life packed into a few cardboard boxes. I came home that night to find him sitting on the floor of his empty bedroom, staring at the blank space where her dresser used to be. He did not say anything. He just looked up at me, his eyes hollowed out, and in that single, shattered look, I saw the full extent of his pain. I did what any friend would do. I sat down on the floor next to him, put a hand on his shoulder, and just stayed there, a silent, solid presence in the wreckage of his life. That night marked the shift. It was the moment the tectonic plates of our friendship, which had been grinding against each other for years, finally slipped into a new, uncertain alignment. Before, our bond was defined by a comfortable, established distance. We had our separate lives that intersected in our shared living space. But with Sarah gone, the buffer that had existed between us vanished. I was no longer just his roommate and best friend. I was his primary emotional support, his closest confidant, the only person left standing in the rubble. He was adrift, unmoored from the life he thought he was building, and he clung to me like a man lost at sea clings to a piece of driftwood. And I, fool that I was, let him. I had spent years learning to navigate the safe, predictable currents of our friendship, and suddenly I was cast into a deep, turbulent ocean, with no map and no land in sight. His need for comfort manifested in subtle, physical ways. It began with him migrating from his room to the living room. He would claim he could not sleep, that his room felt too empty, too quiet. So he would camp out on the sofa, a tangle of blankets and pillows, the blue light of the television flickering over his face all night. I would find him there in the morning, asleep with a textbook on his chest, and a pang of something fierce and protective would twist in my gut. I started leaving a glass of water on the coffee table for him before I went to bed, a small, unspoken gesture of care. He never mentioned it, but the glass was always empty in the morning. These were the first threads of a new pattern we were weaving, a quiet language of care that existed in the space between words. Then, one night, about a month after the breakup, he knocked softly on my bedroom door. It was late, well past 2 in the morning. I was reading, unable to sleep myself, the silence of the apartment feeling heavier than usual. I called for him to come in. He opened the door just a crack, his face barely visible in the sliver of light from the hallway. He looked small, younger than his 24 years, his usual confidence stripped away, leaving behind a raw, boyish vulnerability. "Can't sleep," he mumbled, his voice thick with exhaustion. "Mind if I just hang out in here for a bit? The couch is killing my back." It was a flimsy excuse. Our couch was new and comfortable, but I understood what he was really asking. He was not asking for a better sleeping surface. He was asking for proximity. He was asking not to be alone. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. This was new territory, a line we had never approached before. But looking at the profound loneliness etched onto his face, I could not bring myself to say no. I was a cartographer of my own emotional landscape, and I knew this was a dangerous, uncharted region, but his pain was a magnetic north I could not ignore. I simply nodded, shifting over on my queen-sized bed to make room. He slipped into the room, closing the doors softly behind him, and crawled into the space I had made. He laid on his back, on top of the covers, his hands folded on his chest, maintaining a careful, deliberate distance between us. The air was thick with unspoken things, with the sheer novelty of the situation. We were two bodies in a space that had always been exclusively mine, and the very air molecules seemed to be vibrating with a new, strange energy. We lay there in silence for what felt like an eternity, the only sounds the distant hum of the city and the frantic beat of my own heart. I did not know what to do, what to say. I just lay perfectly still, my entire being focused on the few inches of empty space that separated my arm from his. Then, he sighed, a long, shuddering exhalation that seemed to carry the weight of the entire world. He turned onto his side, facing me. In the dim light filtering through the window, I could just make out the shape of him, the line of his shoulder, the curve of his hip. "Thanks, Leo," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's just really quiet in here." He meant his own room, his own head, his own life. And I understood. "I know," I whispered back. And that was all. He did not move closer, and neither did I. But his presence was a brand, a warm weight that reshaped the geography of my bed, of my room, of my entire world. He fell asleep within minutes, his breathing evening out into a slow, deep rhythm. I stayed awake for hours, listening to the sound of it, terrified and yet filled with a strange, dangerous sense of peace. It was the beginning of the ritual. That one night became a recurring event, a silent agreement that formed between us without a single word of discussion. It did not happen every night, but on the bad nights, the ones when the loneliness pressed in on him, my door would creak open. He never knocked again. He would just appear, a ghost in the doorway, and I would shift over, and he would slide into the bed beside me. The pretext of the uncomfortable couch was quickly abandoned, left behind like a piece of useless conversational baggage. We did not need it anymore. What we were doing existed in a space beyond excuses, in a gray area of unspoken need and unspoken comfort. It became our new normal, a ritual shrouded in the plausible deniability of grief and friendship. Each time it happened, my mind would race, trying to decipher the meaning behind it. My brain, the quiet observer, went into overdrive. I analyzed every detail, every subtle shift in his breathing, every accidental brush of his skin against mine. Was this just friendship? Was he so shattered by his breakup that the normal boundaries of platonic affection had dissolved for him? Or was there something more, a nascent feeling he himself did not understand or could not acknowledge? I was a detective searching for clues in a case where I desperately wanted to find a specific answer. Every piece of evidence was scrutinized, held up to the light. The way he would sometimes murmur my name in his sleep. The way his hand, in a moment of deep slumber, would migrate across the mattress until his fingers were just barely touching my arm. Each instance was a spark that threatened to ignite the vast, dry tinder of my hope. The cuddling started about a month into this new arrangement. It was as gradual and unspoken as everything else. One night, he shifted in his sleep, his body turning towards mine, and an arm came to rest across my waist. My entire body went rigid. I lay there, barely breathing, every nerve ending firing at once. It was a purely unconscious gesture on his part, a simple act of a sleeping man seeking warmth and comfort. But for me, it was a seismic event. His arm was a heavy, warm weight, a physical manifestation of all my secret, impossible longings. I did not move. I did not dare. I just let it rest there, a brand of impossible intimacy, until the sun began to rise. When he woke up, he pulled his arm back with a small, sleepy murmur, seemingly unaware of where it had been all night. He never mentioned it. And so, it happened again. Slowly, tentatively, the unconscious gestures of the night began to bleed into the waking hours. It started on the couch, our old territory, which now felt charged with a new significance. We would be watching a movie, and he would lean his head against my shoulder. The first time he did it, I flinched, my muscles tensing in surprise. He did not seem to notice, just settled in, his hair soft against my neck. I forced myself to relax, to accept the gesture for what it was on the surface, a simple, friendly act of comfort. But my heart refused to be rational. It hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a wild drumbeat of hope and fear. This became another part of the ritual. Movie nights were no longer about the movie. They were about the quiet, breathless anticipation of that moment when his head would finally come to rest on my shoulder, when I could feel the warmth of him, smell the faint scent of his shampoo, and pretend, just for a little while, that this was something more than friendship. The ritual was a beautiful, exquisite form of torture. It was a constant state of heightened awareness, of living on the knife's edge between friendship and something else entirely. I became hyper-aware of his physical presence in a way that was all-consuming. I knew the exact topography of our apartment, the precise number of steps it took for him to get from his room to mine. I knew the specific creak in the floorboards outside my door that signaled his approach. My room, once my sanctuary of solitude, became a space of intense, shared intimacy. The air in it was different now, thick with the memory of his presence, the scent of him lingering on my pillows long after he was gone. I was living in a state of suspended animation, perpetually waiting for a sign, for a clue that would tell me I was not just imagining all of this. I was a photographer, and my art was all about capturing the decisive moment, that fleeting instant when light, composition, and emotion aligned to tell a story. And here I was, living inside a photograph I could not read. The image was filled with ambiguous details, with soft focus and deep shadows. I was both the photographer and the subject, and I had no idea what story I was telling. Was this a portrait of profound friendship in the face of grief? Or was it a love story, developing slowly in the dark, waiting for the right moment to be brought into the light? I was terrified of exposing it to the light, for fear that the image would turn out to be nothing at all, just a fog of my own wishful thinking. So I kept it in the dark, living in the quiet, intoxicating ambiguity of our nightly ritual. Then came the night of the question. We were on the couch, in our usual positions, a nature documentary playing on the screen. He had been quiet for a while, his head resting not on my shoulder, but on my lap. This was a new development, a new level of intimacy that had left me feeling breathless and completely paralyzed. He had just shifted down, without a word, and settled himself there, his ear pressed against my thigh. I could feel the warmth of his breath through the denim of my jeans. I had my hand resting on the cushion beside his head, my fingers aching with the desire to touch him, to run my hand through his soft, messy hair. But I kept it perfectly still, a statue of self-control. It was in that moment of intense, fragile stillness that he lifted his head slightly, looked up at me with those searching, serious eyes, and asked the question, "Leo, why do you never date?" His voice was muffled by my leg, but the words were clear, sharp, and devastatingly precise. And when I turned the question back on him, and I saw that beautiful, shocking blush spread across his face, something inside me shifted. The fear that had been my constant companion for months was suddenly joined by a new feeling, a flicker of audacious, terrifying hope. His reaction was not one of friendship. It was not the reaction of a man simply pondering his post-breakup single life. It was the reaction of someone who had been caught, who had been seen in a way he did not expect. My question had not been a mirror. It had been a flashbulb, and for a split second, it had illuminated a hidden corner of his heart, revealing an image he himself was not ready to see. The air between us crackled with the afterimage of that flash, and for the first time, I felt like the story we were in might have a different ending than the one I had written for myself. The weeks that followed his blush were a study in quiet tension. The ritual continued, but it was different now. The air of plausible deniability had thinned, become translucent. When he came to my room at night, or rested his head on my shoulder on the couch, there was a new self-awareness to his actions, a hesitant quality that had not been there before. It was as if he were consciously testing a boundary now, stepping over a line he was suddenly, acutely aware of. He would look at me before he did it, a quick, searching glance, as if seeking a permission he would never dare to ask for out loud. And I would always give it, with a small, almost imperceptible nod. We were communicating in a silent, intricate language of gestures, a dance of approach and acceptance that was both thrilling and agonizing. The anxiety in me grew, but it was a different kind of anxiety now. It was no longer just the fear of my own feelings being discovered. It was the anxiety of being on the precipice of a shared discovery. We were like two explorers who had stumbled upon the edge of a vast, unknown canyon, neither one willing to be the first to speak of the terrifying, magnificent view. We just stood there, together, on the edge, the silence between us filled with the sound of the wind rushing up from the depths. I wanted to reach out, to take his hand, but I was paralyzed by the fear that one wrong move would send us both tumbling into the abyss. So I waited. I watched. I held my breath and hoped he would be the one to take the first step. The moment, when it finally arrived, was not a grand, cinematic crescendo. It was as quiet and unassuming as every other step of our journey. It was a Thursday night. Liam had been traveling for work for nearly 2 weeks, the longest he had been away since the breakup. The apartment had felt cavernously empty without him. My own routines felt hollow, pointless. I had not realized how much his presence, even his restless, grieving presence, had become the anchor of my days. His absence was a physical ache, a phantom limb I kept reaching for. I spent the time developing photos in my small darkroom, the scent of chemicals and the red glow of the safe light, my only companions. I was working on a series of portraits, stark black and white images of empty spaces that felt significant, a rumpled couch cushion, an unmade bed, a single coffee mug by the sink. They were all portraits of him, of the space he occupied in my life, even when he was not there. He came back late, well after midnight. I heard his key in the lock and my heart leaped into my throat. I had left the living room lamp on for him, a small beacon in the quiet darkness. I stayed in my room, listening to the familiar sounds of his return, the heavy thud of his suitcase by the door, the sigh of exhaustion as he kicked off his shoes, the soft click of his bedroom door closing. I expected that to be it for the night. He was tired from his flight, and I assumed he would just collapse into bed. I tried to go back to my book, but the words swam before my eyes. My entire being was attuned to the silence in the apartment, waiting. After about 20 minutes, my door creaked open. He stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the light from the hall. He was still in his travel clothes. His hair was a mess, and he looked utterly exhausted. But there was a look on his face I had never seen before. It was a look of raw, unshielded vulnerability, a desperate sort of weariness that went beyond simple fatigue. He did not move, just stood there, his eyes fixed on me. "Hey," I said softly, my voice rough. "Hey," he whispered back. "Long trip, I bet." The silence stretched, but it was not the comfortable silence of our ritual. It was taut, stretched thin, vibrating with a new, unbearable tension. He looked like a man who had walked for 1,000 miles to reach a crossroads and had no idea which way to turn. He took a hesitant step into the room, then another, until he was standing by the side of my bed. He did not get in. He just stood there, looking down at me, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Leo," he said, and his voice broke on my name. He swallowed hard, trying again. I couldn't sleep. The whole time I was gone, I just kept thinking about this. About being here, my breath hitched. This was it. This was the moment the subtext became text. The unspoken was rising to the surface, and I was terrified of what it would look like in the full light of the room. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding a frantic, desperate rhythm against my ribs. I looked at his face, at the conflict and exhaustion warring in his eyes. He looked lost, utterly and completely lost. And in that moment, all my own fear, all my own anxiety, fell away, replaced by an overwhelming, tidal wave of love for this man, for this beautiful, confused, wonderful man who had stumbled into my life and rearranged all the furniture. He took a deep, shaky breath, and the next words came out in a rushed, desperate whisper, as if he had to say them quickly before he lost his nerve. "Would it be okay?" he asked, his eyes pleading with me. "Would it be okay if I kissed you?" The question hung in the air between us, a fragile, shimmering thing. It was everything. It was the crossing of the line, the naming of the unnamed thing that had been living between us for months. It was permission, it was confession, it was a plea. He was not the confident, easygoing Liam everyone else saw. He was scared, and he was uncertain, and he was laying his heart at my feet, asking me, with agonizing vulnerability, if it was safe to do so. My own voice, when I finally found it, was nothing more than a whisper. "Yes," I breathed. It felt like the only word I had ever known. He seemed to sag with relief, a tension I had not even noticed in his shoulders releasing all at once. He knelt down on the floor beside my bed, bringing our faces level. He did not rush. He moved with a slow, deliberate tenderness that made my heart ache. He raised a hand, his fingers trembling slightly, and gently cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking softly over my cheek. His eyes searched mine, one last time, a silent question. I leaned into his touch, closing my eyes, giving him my answer. And then his lips met mine. It was not a passionate, demanding kiss. It was soft, hesitant, and breathtakingly gentle. It was a question and an answer all at once. It tasted of airplane coffee and exhaustion and a deep, profound loneliness that I recognized as a mirror of my own. It was a kiss of homecoming. It was a kiss that felt like the end of a long, arduous journey and the beginning of another one entirely. It was quiet, it was tentative, and it was the most honest thing I had ever experienced. In the silent sanctuary of my room, with the city humming its distant lullaby outside my window, a line had been crossed, a door had been opened, and the entire architecture of my world had been beautifully, irrevocably redesigned. The aftermath was not the explosion of clarity I might have expected. It was more like the quiet, stunned silence after a storm has passed, when the air is clean and charged, and the world looks both the same and completely different. After the kiss, he had simply rested his forehead against mine, our breath mingling in the small space between us. He stayed like that for a long time, as if gathering his strength. Then, without a word, he had stood up, crawled into bed beside me, and pulled the covers over us both. This time, there was no pretense of distance. He wrapped his arms around me, pulling me against his chest, and buried his face in my hair. I could feel the frantic, unsteady beat of his heart against my back. He held me with a desperate, protective tightness, as if he were afraid I might disappear. And for the first time, I let myself hold him back, my hand coming up to rest on his arm, my fingers curling around his wrist. We fell asleep like that, tangled together in a silent admission, two halves of a whole that had finally, tentatively, found their fit. But the morning brought the light, and the light brought fear. I woke up first, just as the dawn was beginning to paint the sky in shades of gray and pale rose. Liam was still asleep, his face relaxed and peaceful in a way I had not seen in months. His arm was still slung protectively over me, his breathing a warm, steady presence against my neck. For a few blissful, idyllic moments, I allowed myself to believe that everything was simple now. I allowed myself to feel the pure, uncomplicated joy of waking up next to the person I loved. But as the light in the room grew stronger, so did the tendrils of anxiety. What did this mean? What were we now? The kiss had been a confession, But it had not been a conversation. We had crossed the line, but we had not spoken a single word about the new country we had just entered. When Liam finally stirred, the change was immediate. His eyes fluttered open, and for a split second, they were soft with sleep. Then, recognition dawned. He saw where he was, how he was holding me, and his body went rigid. The arm that had been holding me so securely was snatched back as if he had been burned. He sat up abruptly, putting a sudden, jarring distance between us. He ran a hand through his hair, his movements jerky and uncertain. He would not look at me. He just stared at the wall opposite the bed, his jaw tight. The tender, vulnerable man from the night before was gone, replaced by a stranger in a fortress of anxiety. "I should, go," he stammered, his voice rough. He did not wait for a response. He scrambled out of bed, grabbing the clothes he had discarded on the floor, and practically fled from my room, closing the door behind him with a soft, final click that sounded like a gunshot in the silent apartment. I was left alone in my bed, the warmth of his body already fading from the sheets, a cold, sickening dread coiling in my stomach. I had misinterpreted everything. The kiss had not been a beginning. It had been a moment of grief-fueled confusion, an aberration he already regretted. The hope that had bloomed so brightly in my chest just hours before shriveled and died, leaving behind a bitter ash. The next few days were an exercise in excruciating politeness. We moved around each other like ghosts in our own home. The easy, comfortable silence that had once defined our friendship was replaced by a tense, heavy quiet, thick with unspoken words and palpable regret. He avoided me. He left for work before I woke up and came home late, slipping directly into his room. The rituals were gone. The couch remained empty in the evenings. My bedroom door remained firmly, heartbreakingly, closed. He was building a wall between us, brick by painful brick, and I was watching him do it, paralyzed by my own hurt and confusion. The man who had sought me out for comfort was now actively running from it, and from me. The pain was a physical thing, a constant, dull ache in my chest. It was worse than the years of silent pining. Before, I had his friendship. I had the comfort of our closeness, even if it was platonic. Now, I had nothing. In grasping for more, I had seemingly lost everything. I felt like a fool, like I had been so blinded by my own desires that I had failed to see what was really happening. He was not falling for me. He was just falling, and I had been the closest thing to grab onto. The thought was a cruel, sharp knife, and it twisted in my gut with every silent, awkward encounter in the kitchen, every averted gaze in the hallway. After a week of this agonizing distance, something inside me broke. I could not live in this limbo, this purgatory of polite avoidance. The uncertainty was eating me alive. I would rather have a clean, painful break than this slow, agonizing death by 1,000 paper cuts. I needed to know the truth, even if the truth was that I had imagined everything, that the kiss was a mistake he wished he could take back. I needed to hear it from him. I needed the finality of it, so I could begin the long, impossible process of grieving the loss of both a lover I never had and a friend I had lost. I waited for him that night. I sat on the couch in the darkened living room, the same couch where he had asked his life-altering question, and I waited. When he finally came home, well after 10, he stopped short in the doorway when he saw me, his shoulders tensing. He looked like a cornered animal. "Leo," he said, his voice wary. "You're still up. We need to talk, Liam," I said, my own voice steadier than I felt. I did not ask him. I told him. For once, I was not the passive observer. I was forcing the moment, demanding a confrontation. He hesitated, clearly wanting to retreat to the safety of his room, but something in my tone must have conveyed that this was not a request he could deny. He sighed, a sound of pure, weary resignation, and walked into the room, dropping his bag by the door. He did not sit down. He stood by the armchair, keeping a careful distance, his arms crossed over his chest in a defensive posture. I took a deep breath, marshaling all my courage. "What are we doing?" I asked, my voice quiet but firm. This silence. You avoiding me. I can't do it anymore. I need you to just be honest with me. The other night, the kiss, was it a mistake? Is that what this is?" Do you regret it? He flinched at the word regret, a flicker of pain crossing his features before he masked it again. He still would not look at me. He stared at a point on the floor, his jaw working. It's complicated, he mumbled. No, it's not, I said, my frustration finally boiling over, sharpening my voice. It's a simple question, Liam. Yes or no? Did you regret kissing me? The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I could see the battle raging within him, the war between his fear and whatever truth he was hiding. Finally, he looked up, and his eyes were glistening with unshed tears. His carefully constructed walls crumbled, and the raw, vulnerable man from the night of the kiss was back, looking even more lost than before. No, he whispered, the word so quiet I almost did not hear it. God, no. I don't regret it. He finally moved, collapsing into the armchair as if his legs could no longer support him. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. I'm so scared, Leo. I don't know what's happening. His confession, his fear, broke through my anger, and all I felt was a wave of empathy, of a deep, aching tenderness. I moved from the couch and knelt in front of him, just as he had knelt in front of me a week before. I gently pulled his hands away from his face. His cheeks were wet with tears. Scared of what? I asked gently. Of this, he said, his voice choked, gesturing vaguely at the space between us. Of what it means. All these months after Sarah left, I felt so lost. And you were just there? You were my anchor. I started needing you, needing to be near you, in a way I couldn't explain. I told myself it was just because I was lonely. I told myself it was just friendship. But then it wasn't. It started to feel like something else. And it terrified me. Because you're my best friend, Leo. You're the most important person in my life. And I have no idea what I'm doing. I've never felt this way about a guy before. I don't even know what to call it. He was looking at me now, his eyes wide with a desperate, pleading honesty. When I kissed you, he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, it was the only thing in the world that made sense. And the second I woke up the next morning, nothing made sense anymore. I felt like I was breaking everything. Us. Our friendship. I felt like I was going to ruin the one good thing I had left in my life. So I ran. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And there it was. Not rejection. Not regret. Just fear. A deep, profound fear of the unknown, of feelings he did not understand, of risking the most stable relationship he had. All my hurt, all my anger, dissolved, replaced by a profound sense of clarity. We were both just scared. I had been scared of losing his friendship by wanting more, and he had been scared of losing my friendship by feeling more. We were two idiots, standing on opposite sides of a door, both too afraid to turn the handle, not realizing it had been unlocked the whole time. A small, watery smile touched my lips. I reached out and took his hand, my fingers lacing through his. His hand was cold, but he gripped mine tightly, a lifeline. You don't have to know what to call it, Liam, I said softly, my voice filled with a certainty I had not felt in my entire life. We don't have to name it. We just have to not run from it. We just have to figure it out. Together, he stared at our joined hands, then back up at my face. A single tear tracked its way down his cheek, but for the first time in a week, the fear in his eyes was being replaced by something else. A flicker of the same audacious, terrifying hope that I had felt. He gave my hand a squeeze, a small, affirmative pressure that spoke volumes. The conversation was not over, not by a long shot. There were still mountains of confusion and uncertainty to navigate, but the wall between us had come down. We were finally standing on the same side, in the same unknown country, and for the first time, we were looking in the same direction. The resolution was not a sudden, dramatic sunrise, but a slow, gentle dawn. The honesty of that night did not magically solve everything, but it cleared the air, allowing something new to grow in the space that fear had once occupied. We started talking, truly talking, for the first time, not just about coding or photography, but about us. The conversations were often hesitant, clumsy, as we tried to find the words for feelings that were entirely new to Liam and frighteningly powerful for me. He spoke of his confusion, his deeply ingrained ideas of who he was supposed to be, and how his feelings for me did not fit into that neat, pre-drawn box. I spoke of my long-held affection, of the years I had spent quietly loving him from the sidelines, and the terror of risking our friendship. We laid all our cards on the table, all our fears and vulnerabilities, and in that shared honesty, we began to build a new foundation. It was a foundation built not on assumptions or plausible deniability, but on a deliberate, conscious choice to be together, whatever that meant. We took it slow. The rituals returned, but they were different now. They were intentional. When he came into my room at night, it was not as a grieving friend seeking mindless comfort, but as a partner seeking closeness. When he laid his head in my lap on the couch, I would run my fingers through his hair, and he would sigh, a sound of contentment, not of restless sorrow. The touches were no longer ambiguous or accidental. They were a language we were learning to speak together, a vocabulary of gentle, deliberate affection. One of the biggest changes was in the small, domestic moments. We started cooking dinner together, navigating the small space of our kitchen in a new, intimate dance. I would be chopping vegetables, and he would come up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder, watching my hands work. These simple, everyday acts of domesticity became the bedrock of our new relationship. They were quiet affirmations of our togetherness, a constant, gentle reminder that this was real, that this was our new normal. The apartment, which had been a space of tension and avoidance, once again became a home, a sanctuary that felt more peaceful and more complete than it ever had before. I remember one Saturday morning, about a month after our conversation. I woke up to the smell of coffee. I walked into the kitchen to find Liam standing by the counter, shirtless in his pajama pants, pouring 2 mugs. He looked up when I entered, and a slow, easy smile spread across his face. It was not the wide, boisterous grin he gave the rest of the world. It was a soft, private smile, one that was just for me. He handed me a mug, his fingers brushing against mine, a casual touch that sent a familiar, pleasant jolt through me. "Morning," he said, his voice still thick with sleep. "Morning," I replied, my heart feeling full to the point of bursting. We stood there for a moment, just sipping our coffee in the quiet morning light, the silence between us easy and comfortable once more. It was a perfectly ordinary moment, unremarkable in every way, and yet it felt like a miracle. It was the peace I had never allowed myself to imagine, a quiet, stable joy that felt more profound than any grand, romantic gesture. It was the feeling of being seen, of being known, and of being home. Liam looked at me over the rim of his mug, his eyes warm and clear, and in their depths, I saw not a trace of the fear and confusion that had haunted him. I saw only a quiet certainty, a reflection of the same peace that was blooming in my own chest. That night, as we lay in my bed, curled up together in the familiar darkness, he turned to me, his voice a low whisper against my ear. "You know," he said softly, "I think I finally have an answer to your question." I smiled into the darkness. "Oh yeah, he said, his arm tightening around me. "Why I wasn't dating? It's because I was waiting. I didn't know who I was waiting for." In the end, we learned that the most important rooms in our lives are not the ones with 4 walls, but the spaces we create within another person. They are sanctuaries built of shared silence, quiet understanding, and the breathtaking vulnerability of a whispered confession in the dark. The journey to that space can be terrifying, a walk through a long, unlit hallway where every creak of the floorboards sounds like a step in the wrong direction. But then you find a door, one you never knew you were looking for, and the person on the other side is holding a key. And you realize, with a sense of profound, soul-deep relief, that they have been waiting for you all along. We had found our room, Liam and I. We had closed the door on the fear and the uncertainty, and we began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together. And it was, finally, quiet in here.